Welcome to UFHL Now! A close-up look at the ultimate fantasy hockey league. The most realistic fantasy gameplay. High stakes. High reward. Here's your host, the owner of Duckman's domination in the UFHL, and the mighty Mallards of the UFAHL, Dean Millard.
Hello there, and welcome to another edition of UFHL Now, coming to you from the Marsh, here, the home of Duckman's domination. As you can see, the beautiful jersey over top of my shoulder. My name is Dean Millard, proud owner of Double D, as well as the mighty Mallards in the UFAHL. George Batchel is the GM for that franchise. And, of course, high-level scouting. My lovely wife, Trish Fedeko, heading up that platform with Craig Button as the president of scouting. And we are so happy to be involved in this platform, the most realistic fantasy gameplay out there, combining it with the Zilliqa blockchain. It's a no-brainer for the future of fantasy sports, because no longer are these just players you're trading back and forth or drafting. They're digital assets, they're NFTs, and they're going to go up in value. And that's why we have the Ultimate Fantasy Sports Network to cover this league like it properly should be covered. If you want to get in touch with us at the network, it's on Twitter at UFS Network, or you can email us, ufsn@uffsports.com. If you have a fantasy sports show that you think would be great to join us, if it's quality programming and you have some passion, we'd love to hear from you. You can reach me at Ducks Domination on Twitter or at Duck Millard. And yes, I do know I have a bit of a thing when it comes to waterfowl. Well, the drought is over. That's what we're going to be talking about on this week's episode for a couple of big nuts in the UFHL. The Oilers played the Senators, so McDavid and Draisaitl got their points. We're going to run through a few other things in the UFHL, including a very motivated Evgeny Malkin. Wonder what that silent partner thinks about Malkin's tear since leaving Red Army. Our UFHL Insider Larry Fisher is going to drop by with all the goods on the UFHL. We're going to be talking about franchise values, some players out there, some teams that could be making some moves, and Larry's going to have some advice when it comes to the draft, which we will be discussing as we're prepping for a July draft now instead of January or possibly next summer. And we'll take a look at the top 10 standings and wonder if Red Army will be caught at any point, or if they will go wire to wire. I think they started off, I know they were power ranked 19th, but I think they could be going pretty close to wire, at least a good portion of the season. We're also going to take a look at the draft lottery and the 5 teams vying for it right now, and how the expansion franchise will sort of play into that scenario. So all of that still to come here on UFHL Now.
This is UFHL Now with Dean Millard. Get in the game, where you own the game.
All right, so this is what we're going to start with this week, and talking about how some of the elite superstars of the National Hockey League rebounded, and in a big way as well, as we start taking a look at the last time we talked anyway. That's how we'll do things on this show. We'll go from Friday to Friday and see how players are dealing with things, and the dynamic duo for the Edmonton Oilers. I can't imagine if you ever had them on the same fantasy team, but they were back at it again. McDavid for the Yetis puts up 18 points, 14 shots in 3 games. Draisaitl, who only had 1 point in the previous week, McDavid had none. 7 points, 2 power play goals in the 3 games. It was just domination, as you would expect. Nothing crazy to be celebrating for the Oilers, but in fantasy, you celebrate every point. So pretty awesome output from those two guys as they rebounded, as you knew they would. The interesting thing I'm looking at is this little third tidbit. Yevgeny Malkin has 10 points in 8 games since the deal. Listen, I think Luke is doing a great job, a.k.a. George Steinbrenner, with Red Army. But this was a puzzling move for me to trade the Russian captain, and I think it's showing. I think Yevgeny Malkin is, I'm just saying, not saying turning his back, but he's telling Luke and the silent partner, this is what happens when you trade me and trade a Russian star. And you got to wonder, how many Malkin jerseys of Red Army were out there now, and are people burning Red Army jerseys right now because they're so upset about this? But interesting stuff with Yevgeny Malkin really getting it going in the last 8 games, and obviously motivated since Steinbrenner and the silent partner swung that big deal. How about Andre Palat for the Royals? Big night for the Royals on Thursday night. And Palat, 8 points, 5 of them on the power play, so extra bonus points for there. And that Tampa team, no Kucherov, but they're just getting production, and guys are getting opportunities. Palat, was part of that Johnson and Kucherov line at one point. So other guys are getting some opportunities with people out, and it's quite interesting. This is amazing, though, this middle point. Kaapo Kähkönen and Semyon Varlamov, just deadly this week for the Ice Vikings. What goaltending! 7 wins and a combined .977 save percentage. They only gave up 7 goals between the two of them. So the only problem would have been choosing which goalie to go with if they were both going on the same night. And Anze Kopitar, we've heard a lot about this great LA Kings under Todd McClellan and how great Drew Doughty is, but Kopitar's kind of been forgotten about a little bit. And he was dominant on the power play. A couple of power play goals. He also added 3 apples on the power play, a total of 7 points in the week. So the Stallions really loving that kind of production from one of their big players. All right, let's take a look now at the draft lottery. And these are the 5 teams that right now are in the mix for the draft lottery. These are the bottom 5 teams. Now, the caveat is we got to slide the expansion franchise, and we may know who that expansion franchise or what their name is very soon, but they got to slide in there. So our team, Duckman's Domination, right now, we're leading the pack. We're not going to slide out of the top 5. We're not going to catch a whole lot of people, and that's okay because our fans love us, and they know what we're doing. We're rebuilding. But it's going to be interesting for teams like the Monarchs and the North Stars and the Blizzard when that expansion franchise kind of slides into that mix when we do the actual draft lottery. And we will mimic everything about the National Hockey League when it comes to the draft lottery. The North Stars, they've got a pretty good lead, if you want to call it that, on the Eliminators, who would be the next team that would slide in there. But these 5 teams are pretty solid in the top 5, and then we'll see what happens when the expansion franchise gets in there as well. But it brings us to the interesting question about the draft lottery coming this summer. For a lot of teams and scouting agencies, this is really good news. Even though maybe some of their players won't go for as much because who knows what's going to happen with the draft, but it means income. And then they can go after the 2024 players because that will be coming out soon as well. If that 2021 draft had been pushed back, that's no income for those scouts. And my wife and that agency, we have 8 picks in the first 2, well, the only 2 rounds that we have this year. So that is definite income that this whole franchise conglomerate could use. So I listen, I don't think it's fair to the prospects, to the teams, to the scouts, but there were too many things regarding, the labor law and things like that we're just not going to be able to make it happen. So the fortunate thing is everybody's in the same position as far as teams and scouts. The unfortunate is not everybody's in the same position as players. We know Owen Power is what he is, but the guys that are, at the back end, middle end of the draft and the middle of the rounds and the back end rounds, they're not going to have that real opportunity to have that great second half surge and things like that just because there hasn't been enough hockey. But as from a scouting agency point of view, and I talked to Trish and Craig about this, they're excited about the ability to, bring in some cash flow from the draft prospects that they have. And from a franchise owner, I'm excited because, I can go out and draft that prospect that's on their list, pay the fees to the league, and then the rest of it is split between my wife and I, which, we're adults. We use the same bank account, and Craig Button. So it makes it so much more cost effective. If you do not have an affiliate with a scouting franchise, you are definitely doing a disservice to your franchise as far as, whatever that relationship might be. It doesn't have to be a husband and wife. It could be a friend and you guys work out some sort of deal. But if you're not affiliated with somebody, you're definitely missing out on that one. All right, let's now get to, I'll bring it up here, the top 10 standings from this week. And the kind of the big question I've been asking is, will there be an opportunity for Red Army to be caught? Like, is there going to be a team that is going to be able to catch Red Army for number one?
Child, please.
Apparently not. Ocho Cinco says. There is a 46.35 point lead right now between Red Army and the Ice Vikings. I just look at the team, Red Army, I hope this doesn't happen, but they could withstand some injuries as well if they were to run into them, because they just have so much depth going on right now. Like, it's just kind of an embarrassment of riches, because Steinbrenner spent so many riches to get those, and good on Luke, man. It is very impressive to see, and I don't know if I'm going to go no on if he's going to be caught, but there's a few teams out there that are still going to give it their all. And they're not that far off, but they're going to have to go on a bit of a run. The Titans are just over 50 points. Those are the only two teams that can catch. The Yetis are 130 points back. I don't see that sort of lead being made up, but stranger things have happened. So as we look at the top 10, Red Army stays in number one. The Ice Vikings, they move up one spot after they had dropped last week, so they're back into number two. The Titans in three. The Yetis, Royals, Rock Republic, Outlaws, all staying the same at 4, 5, and 6, and 7. The Grizzlies move back into 8th. They dropped to 9th last week. The Stingrays, one spot to number 9. And the Blades of Steel, they remain exactly where they are. Yes, Blades of Steel.
Game on!
Love those old school video game graphics and sound effects. That was one of the first games that actually had sort of a play-by-play. It's the pass or whatever the heck that guy is saying, but still pretty good stuff. So that wraps up the first segment of our show. Some really impressive performances from some teams out there. Congratulations to you all on your success. And now let's get to the fun part of the show. Our UFHL Insider, Larry Fisher.
Time to get the scoop on the UFHL with our insider, Larry Fisher. He's had lines in the water all week long. What will he reel in for us today? Let's dive in and find out what's going on with the UFHL. Now!
Always great when I get to chat with UFHL insider Larry Fisher, and there is never a shortage of interesting topics and tidbits going on in this league. So, Larry, the first thing we're going to talk about is something that really started buzzing after that expansion franchise, that record expansion franchise sale. And lo and behold, teams are, making it known that they could be available.
Yeah, it's a bit surprising, but yet not that when you see a 10,000 USD sale price on the expansion franchise, that another franchise in the UFHL is at least willing to field offers and publicly come out and say, hey, my franchise is for sale, bring your best offer kind of thing. And that is the Elite Assassins, owned by Elaine and Harrison. So yeah, they're out there. As you can imagine, when we had 40 bids and 7 different groups interested in the expansion franchise, kind of strike while the iron is hot mentality. And and there is interest immediately after their announcement. Within hours, a couple different groups reached out and expressed interest, and it sounds like they're going back and forth a bit, but I wouldn't say that sale's imminent. I don't think the Elite Assassins are selling tomorrow, because I know Elaine and Harrison especially really enjoy owning a franchise in the Ultimate Fantasy Hockey League, but they're open for business, and they certainly are some people kicking tires and knocking on their door.
Well, and that's the thing, when that sale went down, everybody was saying, okay, this is the minimum price we should be selling at. And it sounds like, from the rumblings that they're going to get their price, or they're not going to sell. And, they're not in a hurry, so they can sit and wait for the price that they want to get, and, cover anything off that they might have to do in concentrating on the scouting side.
Exactly. And I reached out to Harrison right away because, again, a bit surprising that, because I know how much he enjoys the UFHL, a bit surprised that their franchise was going up for sale. And that's what he said. Somebody's got to meet our asking price. I know he said they wouldn't listen to anything under 12,000 USD, so a slightly higher than the expansion franchise. And you nailed it. He said, you know what? I really enjoy the scouting side of this platform. I have Ruby ISS scouting agency. I'm busy with the scouting. I look forward to the futures auctions. He also said, you know what? I'm a baseball guy and an MMA guy as well. He said, I know baseball and mixed martial arts are not far off for this platform. I'd like to potentially buy a franchise and be a franchise owner in one of those two leagues, as well as, with the Legends League. He mentioned that he's won 11 cups in What If Sports, which is simulation play based on legendary players. So the fact that UFF Sports is going to expand to the Legends Leagues, he would gladly take potentially sell the Elite Assassins and reinvest that money in the platform, both through the Ruby ISS scouting agency and potentially re-enter as a franchise owner in a different league or at a different time.
Well, when you consider, some bought in at $200 to get 12,000 out of that is an incredible investment. But there are some franchises that are thinking even bigger and looking at adding another figure onto that sale as a 6-figure sale for some franchises.
Yeah, you can attest to it, Dean. Immediately after the expansion franchise auction wrapped up, the owners were celebrating, of course, because they get a portion of that sale goes to each individual franchise. But they said the benchmark is 10,000 now, but they added a 0 on there, and about a half dozen different franchise owners weighed in the conversation that day, and it ranged from, I think some said as low as 30,000, but sort of seemed like the benchmark was 100,000, and some, I know Arlo Scholes, the owner of the Stingrays, said he wouldn't accept less than $500,000, so 500,000 USD. And to me, that speaks both to the investment side, and I know Arlo understands the NFTs and the crypto and blockchain and where this is all going and the potential here better than most. So that's why his valuation is as high as it is. But it also speaks to the user experience and the fact that the current owners are really enjoying the UFHL and they don't want to leave unless somebody blows them away with an offer. So certainly some people will say that's aiming awfully high, or some people would say unrealistic to expect 6 figures for a fantasy franchise. But again, we're talking NFTs and we're talking investments, and you see a piece of digital art sold for $69 million this year as an NFT, or this week rather. So if other things are selling in the millions, there's no reason to discount the potential for a fantasy franchise to reach 6 figures sooner than later.
Well, and when Arlo speaks, particularly about crypto and in the crypto chat that we have on Telegram, I listen. He certainly knows what he's talking about in there. Him and I might not always agree when it comes to hockey stuff, and that's the beauty of this league. But I definitely listen to him when he's talking about this stuff. And I'm all for $500,000 franchise evaluations because I would love for Duckman's domination to get there someday. And the reason we're talking about these massive inflations of the franchises is because of that expansion franchise sale, and we can soon probably stop calling them the expansion franchise, right?
That's true. It's not imminent again, but it certainly sounds like they're getting close on the franchise name, which is awfully exciting for Darwin and Drew, as well as their general manager, Brennan Kopp. They they met again this week, and they're really narrowing down the list. And unfortunately, their preferred option or their preferred choice that they sort of presented to the founders and to the brass was a conflict of interest with one of the current franchises. It was just too close. The name of their preferred or their favorite name was too close to another franchise. So a bit back to the drawing board, but they had several options and they had narrowed it down to a top 3. And so they're still working away on at least 2 of those top 3 and maybe entertaining some new options. But I can say, and again, we can't spill the beans on what those name options are, but it wouldn't be surprising to me if the expansion franchise name ended up starting with the letter B.
That's interesting. And listen, that happens all the time in different sports. In fact, I was originally Duckman's Dynasty. That's what I came into this league as, but obviously there was already a team named Dynasty, so we switched it up, and it'd be the same thing. The NHL isn't going to allow a team called the Oil Drillers or something like that, right? You have to have some sort of distinction. So that is very good. And now that they're narrowing down the name, Brendan is going to be really busy picking talking about different players, and he's mentioned he's going to really try to get creative when he was on that podcast with us.
Yeah, so a couple things jumped out at me. The first one was his appearance on the podcast. Certainly the new owners as well as Brennan made a very strong first impression. And, Brennan, they want to keep their cards close to their chest and not reveal their whole strategy. But one thing Brennan said is that, we might take a page out of the Vegas playbook where we take on a big contract or a bad contract and some team that's in cap trouble. We can provide that relief if you're willing to attach a top prospect or a productive player on one of those cheap ELC entry-level contracts. So like I said, that worked well for Vegas and getting guys like Shea Theodore and Alex Tuck. So that was one point that really jumped out at me on the podcast, a little bit of sharing on the strategy side to what they could be looking at leveraging, helping some teams out of cap trouble. Because we've talked about it on this episode or on this show several times already that half the league is within a couple $1 million of the salary cap, and they might be able to weasel out of there a little bit with UFHL free agency, but a lot of those teams have young players that are going to sign bigger contracts too, so they're going to be in cap trouble, and the expansion franchise will gladly help them out of that loop or out of that jam. And the other thing that stood out to me with Brennan, again, he's getting to know the league. He said he's getting a fairly warm reception, making some friends or frenemies on the Telegram chats and in the DMs, but he's putting his neck out there a little bit at times. And one thing was people were sort of chatting about the breakout season for Adrian Kempe of the Los Angeles Kings, and he had a hat trick the one night, and it was Brennan weighed in. He was one of the first people to comment saying he's had a nice season so far, and that comment really caught my eye because when you look at the Grizzlies protected list for their 7 forwards, it looks like Adrian Kempe would be the odd man out there, along with Chandler Stevenson, who's a Saskatchewan kid and former Regina Pat. So I think Adrian Kempe, Chandler Stevenson could be 2 names they're eyeing up from the Grizzlies, but certainly it's safe to say they're already not trash talking, but they're starting to identify some targets, and they're not afraid to name drop some of them on the chats.
See, this is the good stuff that we bring you here with the UFHL Insider. I think Darren Dreger is amazing at what he does, but they're not telling you what the GMs and the owners are texting and saying. We are telling you here in the UFHL what is exactly going on in this league. And with that, there's going to be a lot more private or direct messages going on in the next little while because we're getting so close to the trade deadline.
Yeah, so you look at the NHL, and we mirror the NHL timelines and schedules identically here in the UFHL. So as of today, we're exactly 1 month away from the April 12th trade deadline, and we're essentially exactly or basically halfway through the UFHL season, which again goes from game 1 to game 54 of the NHL campaign. So we're halfway through the season, and we're 1 month away from the trade deadline. So you're right. I think this was a bit of a quiet week in the UFHL. There was no big blockbuster from our last episode, and there wasn't even necessarily some new big names tossed out on the trade bait board. So it was a slower week, only 7 trades in total, and the biggest name moving was probably a guy like Colin Miller, who ended up going to Dynasty for a package of Jacob Larson and Adam Brooks and Casper Simontevel. So, Colin Miller has a fairly big contract and not a huge name. So it wasn't a big week for blockbusters, but it could be the calm before the storm, like you say, Dean, because we are exactly 1 month from the UFHL and NHL trade deadline on April 12th.
And, there's going to be more and more names going up on that trade board as you get closer. We've taken the strategy to wait till, we're much closer to the deadline. We just think we'll be able to get more. So we're just telling teams, circle back at the trade deadline if you still want us. And if we don't trade the guys that we have on the block, we're okay keeping them. But there's going to be a lot more chatter for some of those teams that really want to try to cash in and get their rebuild going for next year with some picks and things like that. So I think we're going to start seeing a lot more names on that trade bait board as we go.
Yeah, and some of the intriguing ones that have popped up in the last week, the Royals with Brent Baldwin joining Arnie Entz on their management team. Brent's had some new ideas, and so we've seen guys like Mike Hoffman and Brandon Tanev from the Royals, two productive forwards for them that could potentially be in play. Another one that jumped out at me was Joonas Korpisalo, goaltender for Columbus, who's property of the Yetis in the UFHL. And the Yetis had a tough decision to make because they have a goaltending tandem of Mackenzie Blackwood in New Jersey and Joonas Korpisalo in Columbus. And the fact that Korpisalo's name is floated on the trade bait board tells me that they're leaning towards protecting Mackenzie Blackwood, all things being equal. So if they can move Joonas Korpisalo instead of losing him for nothing to the expansion team or to the expansion franchise, I think that'd be their preference. So, and as well, I think they'd like maybe a little bit more firepower on the back end on defense. They got Neil Pionk playing well, and Zach Werenski's had a bit of a slower season. So if they could get another defenseman for Joonas Korpisalo, sort of a money in, money out deal, I think that would make sense for the Yetis. And speaking of defensemen and that potential, Nick Letty of the Tornadoes is a player that the Tornadoes are at the bottom end of the standings. They're rebuilding, and they're looking for a first-round pick and as high of a top prospect as they can get, or as good of a prospect as they can get for Nick Letty, who's having a good season, much like most of the New York Islanders lineup. Kind of a bunch of unsung heroes there with the Islanders, not the biggest names, but they've all been productive both in the NHL and the UFHL. So Nick Letty's out there. And then one name that has been in the news this week and certainly is of interest is Oscar Clefbaum of the Stingrays. The Edmonton Oilers announced he's going to undergo shoulder surgery at the end of March, and that he's hoping to play next season. There was some talk about he's got chronic arthritis in his shoulder, and there was some talk he might be forced to retire. Oscar Clefbaum has come out and said, hey, I want to play next season. So in a dynasty league, Oscar Clefbaum would be quite the keeper, especially at his, $4 million salary, which is going to be right around the league average. So he could be a bargain for a team that's willing to give up a win now asset and give the Stingrays a boost. They're sitting in ninth place in the top 10 in the standings. If they could get a boost to get closer to that top 5 with a win now player in exchange for Oscar Clefbaum for a franchise that could use him next season. So a bit of a risk with Oscar Clefbaum, being that he is undergoing shoulder surgery and he's had sort of been injury prone throughout his career. But when he's playing, he's a heck of a defenseman and a good asset on a good contract in the UFHL. So those are the names of intrigue that have landed on the trade bait board in recent days.
Yeah, Oscar Clefbaum wanting to play and Oscar Clefbaum being able to play could be two very different things. And we looked into it. George and I had discussions. We talked with Craig Button a little bit about it to see what, we feel. And I just, we did have some discussions early on, but I just didn't feel, I'm wary. I would take a chance on Oscar Clefbaum, but it wouldn't be a massive chance that I would take. But you're right. If it pays off, that contract and the amount of ice time and power play time that he usually gets with that Oilers team, although Darnell Nurse is cutting into that maybe with his play. But if Clefbaum returns, that is so valuable in the salary cap of being around $4 million. So that's definitely a name to watch here in the next little while. And who knows, maybe Duckman's Domination will circle back and revisit that. We always like to kind of highlight a team or two and what things are going on, whether a team is moving up the standings or just being very busy possibly. And that's what we're talking about with a couple of franchises this week.
Yeah, and last thing on Oscar Clefbaum, I think you're right, Dean. I think it's buyer beware, and good for you for doing your due diligence. And I know you got some connections in the Edmonton media as well, so you might have some inside sources there. You might have an insider that can tip you off the Clef Bomb's likelihood of playing next season. But certainly, as you said, as we switch the focus to some of the franchises to watch, I call them the M&Ms, but the Mystics and the Monarchs. The Monarchs had their brand reveal this week, or launch, and obviously they're the reigning Klein Cup champions, but they've been in the bottom 10 throughout this season, which was a bit of a surprise because they were ranked, I think, 9th in the power rankings heading into the season. But then, of course, Nikita Kucherov is out for the entire season, and you lose your franchise player for the season, and you get a new general manager who's just kind of getting his feet wet in the league and hasn't really been super active in Corey Lazar, who's actually Curtis Lazar's brother, a brother of the NHL player Curtis Lazar, former Edmonton Oil King. But so Corey Lazar, has resurfaced. He had kind of went quiet for a while, but the Monarchs general manager has come out and said, "Hey, I am here, guys. Let's talk trades." And they have a lot of players that are getting interest, including a guy like Nikita Kucherov for a potential blockbuster, more so in the offseason. But I think you could see maybe even a 1-for-1 type thing with a different franchise player going back to the Monarchs to kind of really put their stamp on that roster. But they've also had talks on Victor Hedman. And remember, the Monarchs, from their Klein Cup win, they were loaded with Tampa Bay Lightning. They had something like 9 skaters from Tampa Bay. And so he may try to overhaul or reshape that roster to have a less of a Tampa Bay Lightning influence. And Victor Hedman is obviously the big fish for the Monarchs on the back end. And that trade talk surrounds a large sum of cash as far as the cash considerations goes. And there would be some assets going back, obviously, as well, hockey assets, but the cash would be the real prize there if they did end up moving Victor Hedman. But again, that might be something more so for the offseason. Although if somebody wants to win some more prize money, maybe you give up some cash for Hedman and it takes you a few spots higher in the standings, and you cash in that way to recoup some of your investment. But look for the Monarchs to potentially make some moves. Even though they're in next year mode, they might entertain some movement between now and the April 12th trade deadline. And the Mystics are a team that has been more active and has been on the rise, but hasn't done a lot of roster movement. And Derek Keller sort of took over for Sonja Kleiss. He's not necessarily a general manager. He's almost more of a minority owner who's having the hands-on the franchise. And so he's been more active on the chats, and he's certainly been putting it out there that some big names are available. Guys like Claude Giroux and Sean Monahan. The only thing is they have pretty big contracts, and not too many franchises can take on a big contract in exchange for prospects right now because the playoff teams, the contenders, are all right at that salary cap. So it would have to be a money in, money out type deal likely, which again might be better served for the offseason. But you look at the Mystics, they have guys like Giroux and Monahan, and then they have some veterans who have hot hands right now. Guy like Matt Zuccarello, who's looking really good with Kirill Kaprizov, as well as Paul Stastny, who's really come on strong in Winnipeg and has been getting some top line minutes in Winnipeg. So they do have some assets there. Even a guy like Seth Jones, who isn't having a great season. I'm sure a lot of interest in Seth Jones if his name came into the conversation. And even a guy like Mike Smith in goal, right? A veteran guy on a 1-year deal. Fairly cheap acquisition for a team or a franchise that wants to upgrade their goaltending. Mike Smith's been bringing home a lot of fantasy points for the Mystics as part of their rise up the standings. But you look at the standings, they're 150 points, give or take, behind that 4th playoff seed in the Howe division. And it seems like even though there's half a season left and anything can happen, it seems like a steep hill to climb to close that 150-point gap. So I look at the Mystics as well as the Monarchs both as potential sellers who have some big name assets because they haven't started selling yet. So if those two franchises enter as sellers, look out. We could see some fireworks between now and the April 12th trade deadline.
Yeah, no doubt. The first time we did this, basically you packed Evgeny Malkin's bags for him. So let's talk about 2 players, one who never unpacks his suitcase and another whose name might still be out there in a potential trade. We'll start with Dylan Larkin.
Yeah, Dylan Larkin's name is still out there. He generated a ton of interest for the Outlaws when they first put out a list of names that included other guys like Kyle Palmieri and Thomas Hertl. And, they had a number of good forwards on that list, but Dylan Larkin was the one that got the most interest. And I talked with Nick Utley, the general manager of the Outlaws, and he said, we had multiple offers that we deemed fair value. We would have liked to make the trade, but it didn't work for cap reasons or just didn't work at this current state for where we are in the standings as a top 10 franchise to move down. I wouldn't rule it out, though. As the insiders know, never say never, because as soon as you say it's not happening, that's when Dylan Larkin is on the move. So his name is still out there. There's still interest in Dylan Larkin. And one franchise that I know would still like to push higher, kind of in that 10 to 15 range right now, but would love to crack the top 10, is the Battlehawks. And their general manager, Alex LeBlanc, has swung a lot of big blockbusters involving guys like Steven Stamkos in and Mark Scheifele out. So he's not afraid to make the big move in separate trades. Those two were. But so I look at the Battlehawks as somebody who could have interest in Dylan Larkin, significant interest. And that could be something where they package maybe two forwards whose combined cap hits offset Larkin's incoming cap hit. And perhaps their combined production of the two forwards leaving would offset Larkin coming in. But of course, Larkin being the bigger name, the bigger value NFT, something else has to be attached there. And I know the Battlehawks love their top prospect, Alexander Holtz. He could be a real sniper in New Jersey in the years to come, kind of a Patrick Laine type player as a top 10 pick in 2020. But I think Alexander Holtz could be in play to land a big fish like Dylan Larkin if they can make it work with the salary cap. So I wouldn't rule out Dylan Larkin moving. And if he does, I would consider the Battlehawks a legitimate contender to land Dylan Larkin.
How about the suitcase?
Zach Senyshyn, he's been a suitcase in the UFHL. You're right. He's on his fifth different franchise in the UFHL in 2021. So in January, he was traded from the Snipers to the Tornadoes. And then since then, he's been claimed off waivers 4 times. 4 different franchises acquired him. And obviously, Zach Senyshyn had been playing in the AHL. So he's kind of a wasted roster spot in the UFHL and the active roster as opposed to the protected list. So 4 times franchises have tried to send him down to the minors, to our version of the AHL, to the UFHL, and 4 times he's been claimed. So he went from the Snipers to the Tornadoes via trade, and then he was claimed by the Gators, the Crypto Knights, the Royals, and now this week by Dynasty. And as luck would have it for Dynasty, he gets the call up from Boston shortly after that waiver claim. So we might get to see, or we are getting to see, what Zach Senyshyn can do at the NHL level. And a suitcase in the UFHL, but Boston has been patient with Zach Senyshyn as one of their 3 first-round picks from 2015 when they took Zach Senyshyn, Jake DeBrusk, and Jakob Zaboral at 15, 16, and 17 overall. And the 3 picks after that were Matt Barzal, Kyle Connor, and Thomas Chabot in that order. So, I mean, everybody laughs at what Boston's done, but Zach Senyshyn is finally getting a look in the NHL, potential to stick in Boston, and Dynasty's happy to have him in the UFHL.
Yeah, if he wants some advice, he can get some from NFT Mike Sillinger, who was the NHL suitcase I think he got traded like 18 times or something like that. So Zach has a ways to go if he wants to get there. All right, I love how we end the UFHL Insider with a little insider advice. What do you got for us today? Yeah,
so the tidbit today, or the heads up, is your roster spots. You need to have enough open roster spots for your draft picks come July when the entry auction happens. And what I'm noticing is a lot of franchises are getting real close to that 50 contracts, to that full 27-man protected list. And they're sitting there with, 6 or 10 draft picks. The rebuilding franchises have loaded up on draft picks and their protected list is full. So something's got to give there. So I think it's important for them to remember that if you're holding a handful or more draft picks, you need that room on your protected list in order to have those draft picks join your organization, in order to use those draft picks. So they're going to have to shed some bodies at some point. Obviously, free agency will be they'll be able to release players to free agency prior to that entry auction, anywhere from the end of the Stanley Cup playoffs, the Klein Cup playoffs, up until the expansion draft or after the expansion draft deadline for protected lists on July 17th. There's still a week before the NHL draft on the 23rd of July. So they'll have that week to sort of release some free agents to free up some spots, but they should start between now and April 12th being aware of where they stand on their 50 contracts, which is so important in the NHL to keep a couple spots open for, if you want to make, trade one player for 2 players, you need that spot open. And not only that, if you want to sign your draft picks and you want to have draft picks on your roster, if you're sitting there with a bunch of picks, you better have a bunch of open spots for those picks. So there are some franchises that have more picks than they do open spots. So double check your protected list and your 50 contract total and make sure you're ready to go come draft time.
This is pretty timely. We actually started looking at this last week because we're one of those teams. We have 8 draft picks coming up in 2021. I think we only have 4 spots in our minor league system or our protected list. But we are looking ahead, and we have a number of guys that we had planned to walk away from anyway to be able to make those spots and call up some players that are getting some NHL time. But if you're caught off guard on that and you're heading into the draft, you're going to be out of luck, or you're going to end up having to make basically a bad trade to be able to open up some spots. So it is really good advice and something that we already started looking at just based on the fact that, wow, we have that many picks and only 4 spots. So something that teams are going to have to be aware of. So things that you just don't think of in your regular fantasy hockey league.
And the nice thing, Dean, is that we do have draft picks for 3 years, right? So if you get in a bind, all you do is you trade a first-round pick in 2021 for 2022 or 2023. You kick the ball down the road, and you free up those spots for by the time those later drafts come. But if you've been rebuilding this year and you want an immediate, top prospect on your roster, you need that open spot. So you either got to make room for that spot, or you potentially have to flip this year's draft pick for another draft pick. And like I said, if you're already in that top 5, or if it's a good first-round pick, you don't want to have to give away a pick where the range in exchange for a pick in a future year where you don't know where that team's going up or down and what that draft pick range will be. So definitely something to be aware of between now and the trade deadline to potentially free up spots, and you'll have another opportunity to do so in the offseason. But just like to bring it to everybody's attention that some franchises need to definitely bring out the calculator and figure out how many free agents they can walk away from and how they're going to open up those spots for the draft picks that they already own.
Just like pre-COVID, when we were at the pubs, you have to make room for another draft. Always great stuff from the UFHL Insider, Larry. Thank you so much for joining me, and I look forward to next week.
Thanks for having me again, Dean. Looking forward to it.
This is UFHL Now with Dean Millard. Get in the game, where you own the game.
All right, that is just about going to wrap things up for the show tonight, but some really fun games to look at in the NHL schedule tonight. The Kings and Avalanche. Obviously, if you're looking at points, and I have Jesse Puljujarvi in one of my other leagues, so I'll be watching the Oilers and Sens a little bit, and then the Golden Knights and the Blues. Another interesting contest as well. So here's what's going to be coming at you on the Ultimate Fantasy Sports Network. The UFFS podcast with Darren Bates and Larry Fisher comes at you every second Sunday. The next one will be coming at you March 21st, so a week from this Sunday. Fantasy Hockey Time with myself on Monday mornings, 2 Minute Tuesday afternoons with Darren Bates. We have Tracking the Draft with myself and Craig Button on Wednesdays, and this show, UFHL Now, on Fridays. And as mentioned, if you would like to get in touch with us on the show, there is lots of ways to do it. Follow us on Twitter at UFS Network. Email us at UFSN at UFFsports.com. Just got my new mouth the other day. So that is where you can find us all, and you can join us as well. We've got a lot of really cool stuff coming down the pipe. We have golf coming out very, very soon. Well, we've launched it, and a lot of people are excited about that, so you can find all that information by just reaching out to us for sure. All right. That is going to wrap things up for us on the program. Thank you so much to Larry Fisher, our UFHL Insider, and to you, the viewer. Good luck this weekend to everybody in the UFHL Now, or in the UFHL. This has been UFHL Now. Have a great weekend.
UFHL Now is produced by DM Productions. To get in touch, head to www.podcastalley.ca.